Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thank you so much for being here. I am joined here by four amazing guests from Amplified Opera. This is day two of OperaCon. I'll let the speakers kind of take it away shortly. Before we do so, I just want to welcome everyone tuning in from all over the world. Wherever you may be, thank you for joining us. I just want to acknowledge that this conversation is in part held from Jojake, more commonly known as Montreal. Jojake is historically, the custodians of this land are the Kanien'kehá:ka people, and we just want to acknowledge that they are the rightful caretakers of the lands and the waters that we live and work and play, and that we are grateful to the traditional caretakers of this place for the opportunity to be here and meet with one another. Historically, it's a place for cultural and important an exchange between nations, and so I find it really appropriate that we kick off the day with a very important exchange here. The talk that you'll be watching is a kind of a wrap-up conversation between Amplified Opera and between the teams of members of the Amplified Opera team, not awake yet, and they'll be discussing some ideas that came up during a residency that they recently took part in with Opera McGill. This is a very unique collaboration. I will let Aria, Teiya, Marion, Newman, and Asitha take it away. But enjoy the talk, and thanks for being here.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jen. And to everybody watching, good morning and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us, especially early on a Saturday morning. We are absolutely thrilled to be a part of this inaugural OperaCon. My name is Aria Umezawa. I'm joined today by Marion, Newman, Asitha, Tennekoon, and Teiya Kasahara. And together we are the co-founders of Amplified Opera, which is a new arts organization based in Toronto, Ontario. Amplified Opera places artists at the center of public discourse to inspire audiences to embrace diverse and challenging cultural experiences. This past November, we had the distinct pleasure of facilitating a month-long residency with Opera McGill, and we're here today to share a bit of what we did, to hold our virtual space, and to share a bit about how that ties into the practice of decolonizing opera. But before we get too into things, we need to prepare the space that we are occupying today. So I'd like to first start by throwing things over to Marion. Marion, would you like to launch us off?
Thank you, Aria, and thank you, OperaCon, for having us here. This is a real pleasure. And thank you to Jen for your acknowledgement of the land that McGill is situated on and where you happen to be operating a lot of this from. We're calling in from Toronto and Victoria. Victoria is my homeland, and so I am actually Vancouver Island is my homeland. And so I'm a visitor here for just over 20 years in Toronto, which is a land that continues to be cared for by the original inhabitants here, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Huron, the Wendat, the Chippewa, the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee. And I also would like to acknowledge that the Kanien'kehá:ka have been really amazing allies in many of the fights for our rights and to see treaties recognized all across these lands that we call Canada. And I am ever grateful to them for their support and strength. And I would like to open this space in a good way by just saying, be kind to each other. Think about your communities, who you represent, and how important you are to them in all things that you do. And over to, is it Teiya next?
It is. Thanks, Marion. Good morning, everyone. My name is Teiya. I'd just like to do a simple little breathing exercise just to connect our bodies into our heads, that we're like engaging through these screens and a lot of blue light. So as opera artists, a lot of people out there are lovers of opera. We all do something in common. We breathe, and we breathe deeply and widely and expansively. So let's just do 3 nice big breaths together. And if you want to follow along with your arms, that I will be doing some actions as well, please go ahead. So let's breathe deeply through our nose and up. And exhale through the mouth, arms coming down. Great. And now we're going to breathe to the west. So reach the right arm over through the nose, get a nice stretch into those intercostals. Great. And let's exhale back to an upright position. And let's reach to the east and breathe in through the nose. Reach over with your left. Great. A nice big stretch in those hips as well. And exhale. And let's just do one more, just for posterity. Up overhead again, maybe a little look to the sky. And exhale. Great. Feel your spine kind of aligning, shoulders, hips, the soles of your feet hitting that ground or something firm underneath you. Thank you so much. And I'll pass it over to Asitha.
Thanks, Teiya. It's interesting doing the reach to the east and the west on a swivel chair. I'd like to continue with this practice that Teiya has introduced us to. And wherever you are, I invite you to close your eyes if you would like and continue to breathe. And I invite you to listen to that breath. And think about what that breath does for us, how it nourishes our bodies. And wherever you are today, I want you to notice how you're breathing. And if applicable, to guide that breath into a place of ease. And I like to invite you to think of how that breath flows through your body and how it's doing that this morning. And notice if there are any places where you find that your breath, any places in your body where you find your breath is knocking and finding it harder to get into. And just observe that. And as we continue breathing, I'd like to invite us all to just bring our consciousness to this past week, getting to the end of this week, and using our breath and our exhalation to let go of anything we're holding. And I invite us all to think about how we have changed this year, how so much around us has changed this year. And I invite you to think of what you have learned and what all of us have learned about ourselves, about what we really need in order to find a sense of balance in our lives, or to notice where we are on that journey of finding a sense of balance. And as we draw to the end of this exercise, I invite you to think of water, think of your favorite body of water, or body of water that you've passed along your travels in this life. And to draw attention to how water always finds a way. Remember to continue breathing easily, and to think about how water never really stops on its journey. It's all around us in the air, and it flows and it finds a way around so many obstacles, sometimes gently, sometimes with force. But it exists simply by being. And draw that to ourselves today, and to know that that is enough. That being here is enough. That to be here in our living, breathing form is enough. And with that, I invite you to open your eyes again. And I believe I'm throwing this now. Is it to Marion?
No, to Aria. Thank you so much, Asitha, and Teiya and Marion, for bringing us so nicely into this space. It's my job now to set us up for what we're going to be doing for the next 30 to 40 minutes. So the way this is going to work today is we're going to take turns asking questions and making personal statements popcorn style, which means I'm going to ask Marion a question and she'll respond, then she'll ask Teiya a question, and so on and so forth. And then after the statement, the rest of us will have a chance to respond with our reactions and our thoughts. So just to launch us into the discussion, we thought we'd start by asking, what does decolonizing opera mean? Especially since it's an art form that finds its roots in monarchy. And the truth of the matter is, we've been working through the uncomfortable process of figuring that out since we came together as a team in March. And there are two things that we remind ourselves about this process, which is that, first of all, decolonization is a process that needs a good deal of mindfulness, both as individuals and as a group, and that the way we hold space for each other is integral to that process. Quality of space, whether it be virtual or physical, is incredibly important to what we at Amplified do. So we've adopted the language of brave spaces. It's a term that was coined by social justice facilitators Brian Araro and Christy Clemens. In brave spaces, participants are encouraged to draw a distinction between harm, which is considered destructive, and discomfort, which is instructive. We've found that by keeping this quality of space in mind, we've been able to make room for people to have the opportunity to speak. We've found space for reinterpreting the canon, and ultimately space in ourselves to unpack what makes us uncomfortable. But I want to start things off a little bit more focused and throw this over to Marion. From your perspective, Marion, what does decolonizing mean?
Thanks, Aria. I'm reminded actually from how we've begun this talk today that decolonization includes acknowledging the space we're in, acknowledging the people that are in the space, and making sure that we are all comfortable and have had a moment to land where we are so that we can totally focus our attention on what is happening here, what the task is at hand. But to go back to like the notes that I've prepared and thought about over the past week, decolonization is a word that has popped up a lot over the past couple of years, and I think it's said a lot by people who say that they need to decolonize, or they are working on decolonizing, or their company needs to decolonize. But I don't hear a lot of explanation for what decolonization is. And I've also noticed that a lot of people look to me and think, I know what it is because I'm Indigenous. I'm Kwagyoth and Stalo, as well as English, Irish, Scottish. And reflecting on what is decolonization and how do you explain that to people has made me think about what is it that's decolonized about me. And that self-reflection has helped me to realize that I've been living in a decolonized way since I can remember. Since I was born, since my first potlatch, which was within my first months of being alive, where I was named and brought into community, my family was shown that it was special to have a baby, and that I would have a welcoming community for my entire life. And through that name, which actually means wealth. It's a lovely way to think of a new life as wealth to the community. So this has been a really interesting thing for me to reflect on at this time. And I'm now in the stage of trying to figure out how to articulate what decolonization is, and to companies and organizations, especially Amplified Opera, and the discussions that we've had weekly, sometimes twice weekly, have really helped me to start finding language to explain what decolonization is. I grew up being homeschooled, and I have two amazing siblings. I'm the eldest, but we all did our part in our family to make sure that no one person held all of the responsibility. We called my mom the boss. Actually, my dad is the one that started us off calling mom the boss. And it was my dad's way of explaining that women are comfortable and they deserve to be leaders. And I have only really fairly recently realized that so much of my self-confidence comes from my dad continually lifting me up and saying, you are welcome to lead. And me watching him do that with so many other women in my life. So that's one of the sort of decolonized ways that was just worked right into my dad's DNA. It's always the way that he's presented to us. I think that being part of that family unit, each of us have different qualities, different talents, and our little family community really needed each of those parts. There's a weight that comes with leading, and if everyone carries that weight together, then there's no one person being completely worn out, I think is one way to put it. And that all huge decisions are made as a group, as a community. And an example that I have, a real life example, is when I was 6 or 7, so my brother was 3 or 4, and my parents decided to adopt a baby from a couple that we actually knew. Instead of just making that decision as the adults in the family, they sat Carrie and I down and included us in the discussion about how would we feel about having another member of the community, another member of the family join us. And we really talked it out. What bedroom would this new baby get, etc. And for me, how much time would I get to parent that baby? I was pretty excited about it. And fortunately, the answer was yes. And I have an amazing sister because of it. Something else about decolonization within the community: if someone or something doesn't fit, there is a way to work it out. You have to sit down and hash through it and figure out, what doesn't work, but it's worth it to sit down and do that because everyone deserves to feel like they belong. And clashes are really normal within an artistic community, within a piece. And so finding ways of not just one voice charging through and saying, this is how it's going to be, but keeping everyone involved in that conversation is a decolonized way of operating. And I think it's really healthy to keep minds and hearts open. And that everyone deserves respect. There's because the hierarchy is flattened in this way of being, everyone has a chance to have their voice be heard and to have their needs be brought forward and discussed, because life is not a competition. And we need each other. We need each other in this industry. We need to take turns being the one that's being held up to others and being given a platform to speak. We need to sometimes be the people who hold others up and to give them a chance to be heard. And that whole cycle that keeps going means that we always have time to recharge and time to perform. We have energy that is completely continually rolling on.
Marion, maybe just in the, sorry to interrupt, but in the interest of time,
Yeah.
should we push this on to maybe some reactions from the group or
Sure.
to our next statement?
Yeah.
Any of the team?
I love hearing about your stories, from home, because I'm a West Coaster too. So it always brings me back. But it's just really special to hear you talk about these experiences, because I'm already like seeing how they could directly be related in the industry, like in the rehearsal room, in educational institutions, in big companies, and even how we create, or when we do have conflict, to not shut someone out or to dismiss it or to be passive aggressive, or but to actually deal with it and see everyone on the same level as a fellow human. It's really powerful. So thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. There is room for all of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I,
sorry, I was just going to add, it's partially just accepting and understanding that when people are working in the same space together, even though the approaches may be different, that sometimes we want the same thing, and that conflict that comes up is worth digging into, because it can find a richer, more inclusive way of achieving that end goal too.
Absolutely. Shall I carry on with my question to Teiya? Okay. What does decolonizing opera look like in action, Teiya?
Yeah, this is a big, fun, and exciting question. And there's definitely like a multiplicity of action and movement that could happen and is starting to happen on like many different fronts. And still, I think one of those places that could happen, there could be more action, is within the repertoire, within the canon that we know and perform regularly, but also how we create and what we create going forward. So firstly, I feel it important to understand that in the canon, there are inherent structures on which opera is built, and from which it continues to operate. And inherently, it is a culture that is steeped in white supremacy, a culture that still presents works that are racist and sexist and misogynistic and culturally appropriative, transphobic, homophobic, the list goes on. This reality, though, is really disheartening. But I find that there is still power in seeing the repertoire is not a fixed document, and rather a blueprint. And that my contribution to this canon is as worthy as it was from others 300 years ago. And I am beginning to understand now that I have a choice to not perpetuate the hurtful parts of the opera culture and the operatic canon. And instead, I can choose to find strength and catharsis in expressing my creative truth and ideas. I'm really coming to understand that, each of us as humans, but more so as artists, as singers, are still autonomous, and we are still complex and multi-layered beings in this world and in this art form. And as performers, as singers especially, I think we have to be reminded of this, that we are able to claim our artistic agency. And by doing so, we can have meaningful and liberating experiences, whether it's performing Mozart or like Ian Cousson, or, things like that. We have got modern composers too. And that every artist has a seat and a say at this decolonized opera table. And this is how I feel I can reckon with the problematic aspects of the canon in 2020 today as a racialized genderqueer artist. So looping back, I also think it's important to know the rules so we can break the rules and then disrupt the canon in the way that excites you and liberates you. And also by doing this, also at the same time honoring your whole self in every moment and action as you do this. And then thirdly, I wanted to throw out another thing. I'm a huge advocate for exploring alternative creation models in opera, such as collaborative creation, interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary creation methods, and also thinking about opera as devised creation, what that might look like. So that's what I've prepared. Thank you for that.
I'm really struck, Teiya, by this idea that it's something that we talk about, I think, behind the scenes a lot, like in our own private meetings, but that there is actually value to these canonical works, but presenting them without considering the impact of the themes and politics present in the piece means we're perpetuating a harmful cycle. So in the context of a conversation about decolonization, it's almost, I think, our obligation as artists when we're examining this material to actually do the work to consider what the impact of those images, messages, and themes are. I think that I'm really getting present from what you just said. So thank you for that.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's sorry, I think, oh, there we go. I was just going to say that it really gets me fired up thinking about how it's possible to use problematic material, sometimes like conflicting material, in order to have a conversation that brings people together. And I think today also begs the question, when performing something that fits into that category, you know, considering who it is you want to perform it for and who it is you're trying to bring together and trying to share this art with, and making it accessible and an interesting conversation for them.
Mm-hmm. Totally. And I think, you know, being able to investigate and inquire into these problems and reflect it back on the artist, but also on the audiences today, like, it's a very vulnerable experience. So that brings me to Asitha, to ask you this question. What is artistic vulnerability, and what does it take to be vulnerable, especially today?
I think one of the things that we talk about a lot is how to hold space, and that's something that Aria, you brought up as well when we opened this conversation. And building vulnerable spaces is some. I hear lots of organizations talking about it, about building a space that is vulnerable, building a safe space, building a brave space. And I came across this book by Heather Plett titled The Art of Holding Space. And in it, holding space is defined as, quote, compassionately witnessing, accepting, and supporting someone without judgment while retaining your boundaries and sense of self. And that, to me, then sparked what it was for me and my journey with holding space. And having also done a show with Marion where that was very much emphasized and prioritized, taught me a lot. But it also brought me back to thinking of the fact that learning how to hold space was a personal journey as well. And so my question then is, how does that definition apply to me as a person? Like, how do I hold space for myself, basically? And that, for me, it's if I can do that for myself, if I can get into the practice of doing that for myself, because it's a daily thing, or it's not a one time you do it and then it just happens thing. If I can do that for myself, then I have the practice of bringing that to the spaces that I go into. And I think there's something about the culture in this industry about that is plowing through. Here's what you have to do, get it done somehow. This is what we're heading towards. And we figure out how to bend ourselves out of shape in order to achieve it. And then that becomes practice, that becomes normal. And for me, one definition of art is that it is a visceral expression of human emotion. And in performance art, in performance practice in our daily lives, our emotions and how we feel physically and mentally, it changes from moment to moment. So I feel like there's a conflict there inherent of the get the job done mentality and approach to creativity, which doesn't serve this living, breathing, changing emotional being that I am. And I find it hard to take that mindset into a space where I work if I haven't been in the practice of actually stopping and stepping back and, like Marion said earlier, grounding myself in the moment. And that's not to say that it's not important to have concrete goals that we work towards, but also I try to center myself around my end goal being that my work should make me a better person and encourage the development of a better community. And that defines the end goal of a production or a project, but also I think keeping that in mind defines how I get there. There's a quote by Rilke that I shared with the students at McGill, which reads, quote, "Perhaps all the dragons in our lives are princesses who are only waiting to see us act just once with beauty and courage. Perhaps everything that frightens us is, in its deepest essence, something helpless that wants our love," end quote. And that in a real way speaks to me of the difficult conversations we need to have. And if I can listen and have that conversation and have those hard discussions with myself about myself, to listen to the voices that speak to me not being enough as a person and address that, I think that also then teaches me a lot about listening and conversing with the community and with others. And my final thing is that I really strongly believe that if we can appreciate our own journeys, what it took for each of us to get to where we are as human beings, if we can appreciate the nooks and crannies of our own challenges and battles, our failures, and what it took each time to get up and keep trying to get up, I think we can bring that sense of self-awareness to active empathy in the spaces where we work with others, and to know that we are always changing as emotional beings, and that the spaces that we are essentially the spaces we create and who we are when we come together in community.
Yeah.
Wow.
You're making me think about how when I enter a space like the first rehearsal for something, and how all the nerves and all the concerns that I have, that I'm very focused on me. And when I have a chance to sit, say, in a circle with the whole gathering of administrators, performers, creators in a space, that I can look around that room and see that everyone is having that same kind of feeling of, do I belong here? Do I deserve to be here? Did I do my work properly? Am I ready? What's going to happen next? And that I'm not alone in that. And that if I offer my support to them and my patience and my love, then that just comes flowing back. And it takes the focus off of my own worries and lets me remember that I'm part of a community and that I can be supportive of others too. Thank you, Asitha.
You also made me think of something as to, in terms of like doing the reflection on yourself so you can hold space for other people. I think one thing that, one sort of thing in my brain is that I speak to myself in a way that I would never speak to anybody else in the
Right.
world. Like the things I tell myself about what kind of person I am, how smart I am, how worthy I am. If I ever express that out, like I would never stand by and let someone say that to somebody else. And yet I feel for some reason this is the narrative that goes through my head all the time. And so I think a huge part of my ability to be present for the people in my community, in my space, in my life, in my family, in my circle, is to actually figure out a way to be kinder to myself, because that's almost more difficult. Yeah, Marion saying bystander intervention turned inward. It's absolutely true. Yeah. Anyway, thank you for that.
Of course, yeah. Like the person who's in my head when I'm in a practice room is not a person I want to meet in real life ever, anywhere. So I'm still working on that one. Aria, I think I would like to ask you how this idea of holding space allows people to express themselves authentically in our practice and in our lives.
Yeah. Just going to double check that I'm unmuted. So I think when people think about the work of decolonization or social justice, I think they think that we're working towards a utopia. I think they think we're putting in all this time and effort so that we'll get to a point where everyone's on the same page and everyone is completely at ease and comfortable all the time, which I totally get, because the idea of never being uncomfortable, like, come on, it sounds awesome. I love that idea. And so, to the end of cultivating comfort and ease, I do think there are some things that we can work on. For example, I believe that we need to get better at cultivating a sense of gratitude for the people in our lives and fostering a sense of responsibility for everybody's well-being. And we can definitely work on feeling more connected to those around us and our space and celebrating them for who they are. But I think that there's a part of the concept of decolonizing opera that we as an industry are afraid to look at. And that is the need to bring the humanity back to our process. Opera is such a superhuman feat that we often forget we're dealing with complicated, contradictory, and emotional people. And because we expect each other to be so extraordinary, we have so little patience for people when they show us the ways that they're ordinary. We're disappointed to learn that they're human like us. I find that we don't often see people for who they are, but we see the expectations we've placed upon them, and we get really upset when people fail to meet our expectations. So I think part of holding space, or part of decolonizing, I think it means working to recognize the whole person, to understand that decolonization is a learning process. And if we have any hope of moving forward, we're going to have to accept that there will be disagreements, contradicting views, and even criticisms. It means that we're going to need to shake off the belief that binaries like good and bad, right and wrong, us and them, exist, and accept that for many issues that we're discussing, there's no real end to the discussion. There's just progress through it. So our job is to diligently work through those conflicts. And that is why art, and very specifically to OperaCon, opera can be such a powerful force in this discussion, because opera can and should be open to interpretation. And it can mean different things to different people. And when we leverage that truth of our art to springboard discussions about things that are impacting our communities and societies, not because we might ever find the answer, but because it's the work we need to do, I think we can move forward. So when we hold space for people, when we build community, we're committing to keeping the conversation open, and we're making room for a person's whole self, which means every intersection of their identity, not just the parts we agree with and like, but for the places we clash. And we have to trust that others are doing the same for us. So I think that that's really what we mean at Amplified Opera when we say our space is brave. It means I'm holding space for all the ways you make me uncomfortable and comfortable. And I trust that you're holding space for all the ways I make you comfortable and uncomfortable. And that's all I got, folks. That's it. There's nothing more.
It's interesting because what you were talking about reminds me of the conversations I've been having in my one-on-ones with the McGill students this week. And that element of trust and that element of being open to conversation. And I'm listening to them speak, and it's wonderful to feel like colleagues in that situation and to hear conversations happening that I never had in undergrad or in my post-grad studies. And every single conversation I've had has encouraged me and inspired me afterwards. Like, I have 10 minutes between each one, and I'm like vigorously writing notes. And yeah, it's encouraging to see that what you're talking about and building that practice and building those spaces is already happening with this newer generation of artists as well.
Yeah. Marion, you were saying you had some really inspiring talks with the McGill students. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I was the one who got to meet for the one-on-ones first of this group of people. And I had no idea what I was getting into. I wasn't sure what they would want, but of course I just set the space by saying, I'm here for whatever it is that you want to do, whatever with this time. And the thoughtfulness that went into that they brought with them into our meetings. The notes that they'd taken, the questions that they had made me realize they were really listening. And I guess I mean, it was quite a long time ago that I was doing my master's degree, but I don't know if it's that I don't remember ever being that interested in what was going on in my classes, or if the classes that I was taking were not sparking that kind of interest in me. And I think maybe it's a bit of both. To have somebody like, well, all of them have amazing ideas of things that they want to go forward with, and challenges that they think they're facing, and just talking around about how they can just keep looking within and seeing what value they hold and what they're already bringing, what they were already giving me in terms of hope and power, knowing that they're going to be our next performers and leaders, and that I'm just so excited for what's ahead in this industry based on all of those conversations.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just to add on that, I really see a desire for something more, but I feel like the idea is they've already been seeded in the Opera McGill students' brains, and it's really wonderful to know that like the generation that is just below me is like already cultivating like what artistic agency means to them. And that's really exciting, because I feel like I only figured this out a few years ago. You know, and I'm 35, and they're between, you know, 19 and like 20 something. So they are doing really well. I'm also just checking the chat here. We're getting some questions from the YouTube that's coming through the Zoom here right now. So should I maybe moderate and send them to the group here right now? Great.
That'd be wonderful.
Do you want to read this first one out loud?
Yeah.
From Carol Clark?
Yeah, Carol Clark from U of T asks, is it easier to build trust one-on-one?
I didn't really know Asitha or Marion before we came together in March, and we didn't have the opportunity to sit down one-on-one each for extended periods of time. I think I might off the cuff observe that I think trust actually can be built quite effectively in a group setting. We've started every one of our meetings since March with a check-in that sometimes takes like 40 minutes out of our meetings, but it was a really great way. It makes the rest of our meeting much more efficient. We actually are able to get more work done once we've all had a chance to share. But I do think in terms of really getting to understand the nuances and complexities of an individual, perhaps it's more efficient to do it one-on-one, though not impossible in a group setting either. Yeah.
I would say it depends on the two people. If there's a one-on-one, it really depends on where each of those people are at. And like, some people will just get along and understand each other, and other people, it's hard to figure out what to say next, even if you have respect for each other. And in this group setting, like what you're using as an example is our meetings, which is great, because it is unique in that we were meeting on Zoom, except for our initial invite into Opera 5. I'm seeing Opera 5 up here, Amplified Opera. Except for that initial time that we spent having tea, we have been meeting on a screen. And so I think each of these people in this room here, I have a different experience with already, and have like had different performance experiences with Teiya and Asitha. I think I'm always being myself, but you know how some people in some spaces you just fit a little bit differently, or might be more outgoing or more quiet. So by meeting in a group, I feel like I've grown trust because I already knew Teiya and Asitha in slightly different ways. And so it was easier to get to know Aria because I could just present myself as I am with the people I already know. So in that case, I think it might have been easier to meet as a group.
Mm.
It makes me think about the holding space events that we've had as well. For everyone else listening in, the holding space events are for IBPOC artists who work in Canada, which we had 3 sessions over the summer, and then now we've started doing it once a month. And I think what I'm reacting to is the idea of setting an expectation for the space, no matter how many people are there. And even if that expectation is, hey, we're sitting down with no end goal, we just want to have minds meet at the same place, that's fine too, as long as it's clear why we are being invited or why someone else is being invited into that space. So that we know what we're walking into before we walk into something.
Yeah, that transparency is really beneficial for sure, and I think has served us so well, just being open and honest. So now we're getting some questions. This is great from the viewers. This is wonderful. May I present another one, everyone? Kimberly, great, thanks. Kimberly Francis from Guelph asked, what are some of your favorite examples of disrupting the existing canon?
Well, I, for one, know that my favorite is a piece called The Queen and Me by an amazing artist named Teiya Kasahara, where they are telling the story of the Queen of the Night, or using the character of the Queen of the Night to make incisive commentaries on the culture of opera. So that's one of my favorites, if you know them. If you know of them, maybe.
Thanks, Aria. That's great. Yeah, there's more info on our website if you want to check that out, The Queen and Me. Just plugging the show for one day when we can all be back in theaters and we can do some opera theater mix. Here's another great question from Dean Burry.
Sorry, maybe in a less personally pluggy way. I also had another thought for that one.
Please continue. I wanted to just get a few more questions in, but please.
Yeah, sorry. I'm just so that wasn't just an advertisement that we just left hanging in the middle of a conversation.
My bad.
No, there was an amazing, I had the distinct pleasure of going to the Bayreuth Festival this summer 2019. And I saw their production of Tannhäuser, which is not the opera where you're like, this is a great one to make a political commentary through, except it was freaking brilliant. So Tannhäuser was, Venus was an anarchist, and Elizabeth was a performer at the Bayreuth Festival who represented sort of traditional opera. And so they created this tension that way. There was a drag queen who at one point during an intermission sang Part of Your World. And it was an incredible commentary on gender and sexuality and love and the way we try and control all of those things in society, but also in opera. Brilliant. Mwah. If it ever goes anywhere else, I would try and see it, because that was an amazing production. But anyway, keep going because we've got more questions here. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Some great questions. Thanks, Aria, for that. So Dean Burry asks, what are the first questions to ask when determining if a tradition or common practice period of opera can be reimagined for the modern world or should be abandoned? So whether the common practice should be reimagined or just should be abandoned for our current climate.
I would say, who are you? How are you situated? And why this opera, whatever that opera may be? What is going on in the climate right now, in people's hearts and minds, that would either inspire this to be triggering or thought-provoking?
Yeah.
That's my answer.
Great question.
Asitha, it looked like you had some thoughts on that.
I and what I wanted to say was also connected to what you were talking about just now, Aria, which is I think in the current climate too, it's easy to feel a pressure, for me at least, to use art to resolve the issues of pieces or to resolve whatever we're seeing around us in a more abstract way. And I think it's important for me to remember that art is also a way to ask questions and to focus questions that to around whatever piece is being performed, so that and I think that's an interesting use of bringing people together around art, is to extend that conversation and fuel that discussion.
If I could just mush what Marion and Asitha said together, this is something that I actually said for an Opera America panel a while back, but I think what are the first questions to ask when determining if a traditional piece can be reimagined? I think this is a great question. I think one thing to keep in mind is that when we say problematic, I encourage us to switch the language to thinking about it as traumatic. Like, think about this, presenting this piece as causing harm to another person who might be viewing this, or as Marion said, triggering them. And it's not to say that trauma has no space on our stage. I think actually it can be an incredibly valuable tool, but to not be mindful about why you're asking an audience or a potential audience member to explore a traumatic event, I think that's a good place to start. Like, why is this piece harmful? Like, why is it that communities are expressing that they are being hurt by this particular piece? And what is the benefit of asking them to explore that trauma in a public space at this moment? Might be a good like first step. And then to sort of make sure that we're asset focused. So we're saying like, we're not elevating these voices and this trauma to say that this is all this community is, but to show that there's something beyond that worth exploring. Might be a way to get into that discussion as a thought.
Thank you. I'm just wanting to curate this last question here because I know we're running out of a little bit of time. And just to bring it back to brave spaces, Thera Barkley asks, what are some tangible ways that we as singers can respectfully ensure that the space created for us by directors or other people in charge, I'm imagining, in positions of power, are truly safe and brave ones? So how can singers ensure that these spaces are safe and brave, even though it's probably people in power who are making them?
I, since the pandemic began, have been asking companies to consider bringing artists into the conversation at an earlier point, whether those are artistic advisors or actual performers that will be part of the piece, because often decisions are made without us in mind, and therefore things that we might want or need are not thought of. And so that's one way. If that hasn't happened, I've definitely been in a number of spaces where I have found that things are careening to a crash, and I know from my own feeling and from my colleagues around me that none of us are really feeling like the piece is going to be successful in this rehearsal manner. And so I have spoken up when I realized that no one else would. And bystander intervention actually provides some of the answers for how to do that. But it's a process that I stumbled into because I felt like I cared enough about the work and the people in the room, all of them, including those perpetrating what felt uncomfortable, to want to fix it. And that's what I was talking about when I'm saying that within that family or community setting, not everything always goes well, and you do have to work through some difficult stuff. You have to be able to speak up. And for me, I felt like once you're at that process of performing, and especially if it's a new work, you're the only person probably in the world who knows the role. So that gave me a little bit more of a push to say, well, they're not just going to call in the next mezzo to take over. So I feel like I have some agency here. It's okay for me to speak up, and it will make everything better. I always think when I speak up that it's because I want things to get better, and I know that they can if we just sit down and talk about it. And it may be disruptive initially, but what happens after that, the kind of work and the kind of trust that is built in the room, we were talking about trust earlier, is very, very valuable, and it lasts forever.
Yeah, in my experience too, I think it has been, sometimes you're working with an organization or with people who are very open to being asked for what is required in order to make a space safe. And sometimes that isn't the case. And one thing I'm trying to push for is to have organizations bring people together before the first day of rehearsal, especially now when we're used to using Zoom. Bring everyone together, so when you walk into the room, you realize you're not in a room with people you don't know, or suddenly like there are a couple of performers who already have worked with the conductor and the director, so it already feels like there's another barrier you have to overcome in order to be accepted. And in that regard, until that day arrives, I think trying to create create allyship with your co-creators in a process before getting in the room too, so that you're all on the same page with what do we expect, even though we're not officially doing this with the company. What do we expect from ourselves in this space, and what kind of environment do we want to create? And so that power in numbers also sends a message to an organization, which could change the culture of how we work.
Sometimes companies or leaders of companies will say, right in a room, if anybody wants to speak up about something, or if anybody has more knowledge about something, please share with us. Like, in retrospect, I realize that I've been invited to speak many times before, but I haven't believed it. I haven't believed that they really wanted to hear from me. And take them at their word. And either they do want to hear from you for real, or they'll adjust their language so they don't invite you anymore. But but I think that if they are asking, they probably really do mean it. And just trust that. And then if you have that trust in their process in asking you, you will probably approach whatever the issue is with more calmness and confidence.
I'm just going to jump in because I'm keeping an eye on the time, and I think that's about all we have in terms of time for the session today. So thank you to everybody who asked questions. A heartfelt apology to the people whose questions we did not get to addressing. But I just wanted to first thank Jennifer, Rachel, and Jacqueline from Musique Trois Femmes and Opera 5 respectively for hosting this amazing virtual conference and for inviting us to be a part of this discussion. And from the bottom of our hearts, a huge, huge, huge thank you to Patrick Hansen and the students at Opera McGill for making space for us, and for being so generous with your energy and thoughts and experience. And finally, to those of you who tuned in today, thank you so much for being here with us. We can't see you, but your energy was very much felt. So thank you so much. And Teiya, maybe you can give our last shameless plug and tell folks at home how they can keep in touch with us.
Totally. Thank you so much. So it was such a pleasure to be here today, but we'd love to hear from you. Questions, comments, we're on social media. Please take a screenshot of this. Maybe someone else can throw it in the chat as well. You can subscribe to our newsletter so you'll never miss a beat. And also, for those out there who are BIPOC identified artists, opera artists in Canada or Canadians abroad, we are doing our holding space for a private conversation the third Wednesday of every month. So our next one is December 16th at 7 p.m. And you can just check out our website and the holding space tab to register for free. And we'll see you there. So thank you so much. Bye. Have a great day.